And is the image of the conference. It's also Uri Lesser, but it's not a woman writing, it's a woman in a studio. So, as a feminist art historian, critically examining Martin Buber's aesthetic views and pointing under significance for a transformative account of art history, there exist numerous gaps that warrant our attention. Initially, as I tend to illustrate, art plays an indispensable role in Buber's dialogical philosophy. Margaret Rollin remarks that art history was not a minor interest for Buber, yet there has been little scholarly exploration of this path. Secondly, while Buber was educated in the field of art history, he wasn't an art historian by profession, which suggests his theories on art and aesthetics likely didn't directly shape the discourse in art history academia. However, Emily Bilski has observed that Buber held considerable prestige within Jewish artist communities, many of whom sought his guidance and eagerly participated in discussions with him. Therefore, in relation to modern art, modern Jewish art at the very least, exploring Buber's philosophical anthropology of art is not merely an interesting endeavor, but indeed crucial to the understanding of this historical thread. And finally, it's essential to delineate my perception of a feminist art history as a radical reinterpretation of art history. In this context, feminist art history does not simply chronicle feminist art, but offers a novel perspective to identify art. Buber's interpretation of the human dialogical essence bears potential for art history, a possibility that, I must underscore, remains largely unexplored. So in light of this complex relationship between Buber, the arts, and feminism, this talk will be divided in two sections. First, I will provide a brief overview of Buber's interpretation of art. I aim to demonstrate that creativity, or more accurately, the will to create, is Buber's core belief for both humanity and the arts. The latter section will shift perspectives and illustrate the significance of Buber's reconceptualization of art in the ongoing debate of art versus craft within feminist art discourse. Traditional art history tends to position craft as inferior to the arts, thereby largely failing to recognize women crafts throughout history as a component of art history, consequently relegating them to the realm of the other. However, I will contend that within a Buberian framework, art is indistinguishable from craft, and vice versa, since both encapsulate a will to create. The value lies not in the final work produced, but in the creative process itself. This perspective unveils the capacity of Buber's dialogical art philosophy to fuel a feminist art history, one that not only makes visual the art of the other, but also imagines art history in an alternative way. So opening the first section titled The Between That Becomes a Form, the creative force of the ideal relations, we'll delve into the following quotes by Buber. So first, in the 1901 essay titled Bonfires of the Mountaintop, penned after the Fifth Zionist Congress, Buber cast a fresh gaze on Descartes' renowned statement, I think before I am. Buber counters Descartes' logical pursuit by asserting, and I quote, I create, therefore I am. Within this early work, Buber advocates for the essence of human existence to be recognized not just by our cognitive capacities, but by our ability to actively mold and bring shape to the one that was once formless. By underlying the transformative power of human action, and in this specific text, it is within the context of the Jewish national uprising, Buber illuminates the unique characteristic of humanity, the capacity to scope the world, transmuting abstract notions into tangible realities, becomes the hallmark of existence. The second quote, in Ein Dao, Buber expressively characterizes art as such. This is the eternal source of art. A man is faced by a form which desires to be made through him into a work. This form is no offspring of his soul, but it is an appearance which steps up to it and demands of its effective power. The man is concerned with an act of his being. If he carries it through, if it speaks the primary word out of his being to the form which appears, then the effective power streams out and the work arises. In this citation, the frequent reference in debate around Buber's aesthetics, the core of the artistic act is disclosed as the creation of and by the world. Art does not merely extend from the artist's self, as art historians often argue, but rather exists externally to the artist, insisting on its existence. However, what distinctively emphasizes here is the nature of the relationship as the evaluation criteria. It is through uttering the primary word and engaging in an ideal relationship with the creation that art manifests. Decades later, in Man and His Image work, Buber re-examines the link between the essence of man and the essence of art, where yet again the theme of creativity surfaces. The vibrant and defiant proposition of I create, therefore I am, is reconfigured in accordance with the insights of a seasoned philosopher. Art must be regarded as the image work of man, the peculiar image work of his peculiarity. Creation means originally and decisively a bringing forth, certainly not out of nothing, but out of the creation itself. It is the realm of the between which has become a form. As can be understood from this late essay, Buber sees art as residing in the will to create. Art can be understood as any endeavor impacted upon with a true spirit of creativity. Here, an individual engages with their medium, whether that's marble, words, oil, or embroidered threads, in what we call an I-Dao relations. The goal is to establish a genuine, authentic engagement with these mediums. It is through this procedure that art is continually conceived and it attains its fulfillment within a community. These three quotes unravels Buber's inherent quest to comprehend the human creative force that drives artistic creation and the nature of its product. Initially, Buber posits that human existence core resides not merely in cognitive ability, but in our capacity to generate. Subsequently, he characterizes this singular ability to create as the essence of art and as a result of human encounters within the world. Art is that which emerges from the I-Dao dialogue between the artist or the viewer and the world surrounding them, and only within this dialogue. As many scholars have observed, Buber's dialogical philosophy unites the practice of art in human existence in the world, regarding artistic practice as fundamental to humanity and as dialogical. Indeed, Buber's philosophy provides a fresh perspective on artistic creation as a dialogical process. Maurice Friedman described this as a philosophical anthropology of art. He notes that Buber's approach challenged prevalent perceptions of modern art, insisting, and I quote, "Art exists as art only when created form is incorporated into the encounter of Ein Dao." Louis Emmer adds that Buber's approach, situating art in the humanity's fundamental relations with other beings, could reshape our understanding of aesthetics and art criticism. Now, Friedman and Hammer's critique was situated in the mid-20th century, a transformative period for art that witnessed traditional forms morphing and even dematerializing. The shift also reflects changes in perception about the essence of artistic expression. Abstract expressionism and minimalism emerged during this time, representing not just an exploration of colors, but also the beginning of process-based art. In this movement, the artist's process took center stage, with the final object serving as a window into the creative journey. The mid-20th century was marked also by constant change in the art object themselves, with artists like Warhol transposing everyday items like Barilla boxes into exhibition galleries. This trend signaled a significant departure from the traditional focus on creating permanent, tangible art objects. Instead, artists began to view art as a hands-on process, challenging the boundaries of everyday objects and artistic expression and questioning art's permanence. Conceptual art also emerged in this period, underscoring happenings and prioritizing the importance of ideas and concepts of the final physical form. Artists began experimenting with unconventional materials and techniques, expanding the definition of art. This shift sparked debates about the nature and value of art in society, introducing new possibilities for artistic expression. Therefore, Friedman and Hammer's interpretation of Buber must be understood in the context of their time. Now, given the overview of Buber's aesthetic philosophy and reverting to my lens as a radical feminist art historian, the question I will address in the following section concerns the contemporary relevance of Buber thought to art history, especially in the context of the art versus craft debate. Indeed, half a century since Friedman and Hammer's analysis, Buber's perspective takes a fresh relevance when viewed through a gendered lens. Contemporary feminist theories often focus on political dynamics within art institutions, unmasking the power structures, hierarchies that shape artistic creation and reception. These theories rightly advocates for inclusivity and diversity, championing the representation of marginalized voices in the art world. They scrutinize the social and cultural context in which art is created, aiming to dismantle oppressive structures and foster a more balanced artistic landscape. However, art's histories and theories, whether concerning male or female artists, still revere the notion of the individual artist as an isolated genius. This was recently exemplified by the blockbuster exhibition of Yo-Yo Kusama at the Tel Aviv Museum. While a significant showcase of a remarkable female artist, the narrative remains familiar, focusing on her isolation, mental state, and pioneering work. However, I posit that Buber's concept of art as the between offers a potential paradigm shift to value art. It underscores art's alternative roles within society and community, focusing on the creative, dialogical energy that gives birth to art, rather than its final manifestation as an object to be objectified within a museum. This perspective could diminish the importance of institutional approval and challenge an individualistic paradigm that currently dominates art history. And delving into a specific example, the long-lasting art versus craft debate, this entrenched dichotomy in Western art history seeks to delineate art, typically interpreted as a personal expression, from craft, generally perceived as skillful utilitarian work lacking emotive resonance. This has resulted in fine art like painting and sculpture being valorized over craft or decorative art, such as pottery or weaving. This disparity has been increasingly contested since the 19th century, notably through movements like art and craft led by William Morris and John Ruskin. They vouched for the aesthetic and social worth of craft, arguing their potential to convey personal, cultural, and artistic meanings. Contemporary artists, especially women, further blur the art and craft line, using techniques to challenge art's historical hierarchies. However, the art versus craft debate endures, reflecting broader inquiries about cultural value, creativity, and the definition of art. This bias is problematic, particularly considering its gender implication, as crafts were typically female or domains of primitive cultures, whereas modern art was reserved for Western white men. This discussion is particularly crucial for feminist art historians and theorists as more women artists and their work are evaluated via the craft's lens. As a feminist art historian, I believe art history will not effectively combat its male-centric narrative until the craft ceases to be subordinated to fine art. I propose that the underexplored facet of Buber's philosophy on aesthetics, art, and creativity could provide a fresh perspective in reassessing artistic pursuit. Utilizing a Buberian lens may enable us to reconstruct art history such that craft is not viewed as inferior to fine art. In this reframed understanding, many fine pieces display in museums devoid of the connection to their creators or communities and often objectified as historical great art could be deemed inferior to finely crafted goods actively participating in societal exchange. When craftsmen and craftswomen of the past and present or current industrial designers deeply engage with the materials and consumers, the resultant form, by Buber's definition, is no less art than the paintings, sculptures, installations, and happenings of the celebrated artists of all gender identities in fine art. By conceptualizing art as the between that materialized and valuing it based on the nature of the relationship, there is no inherent bias toward fine art. This perspective could readily apply to the work of a skilled craftswoman. Buber himself exemplifies the will to create, perceived as the essence of humanity and art, with the reference to a prehistorical tribal decoration on an axe. Through this lens, the boy who first inscribed a seemingly unnecessary decoration on an axe did so out, and I quote, a great desire to enter into personal relations with the thing and to imprint on them the relations to them. To use them, even to possess them, is not enough. They must become his in another way, by imprinting on them its pictorial sign, his relations to them. What matters most in Buber's imaginative narrative of this ancient decoration is not the final design produced, but the bond between the boy and the decorated axe materialized in the act. This is not primitive art. This is a boy forging a relationship with the medium, embedding his own subjectivity into it. In this context, art is essentially craft. This viewpoint on creativity, being at the core of both art and human essence, deserves our attention, particularly when considered in light of the 19th century art and craft movement. However, Buber's stance appeals to hold a subtle complexity. In the art versus craft dichotomy, the function of craft isn't merely to add aesthetic appeal to society, whereas art carries profound meaning, but rather both art and craft exemplify the very marrow of life as they manifest the will to create. Indeed, I argue that Buber's conceptualization of art and the resultant criteria for its assessment places art and craft on equal footing. This provides a novel platform for appraising artistic pursuit and paves the way for a second reinvention of art history. The first one dated the modern art to the 18th century. In this story, craft doesn't play second fiddle to fine art. In such a reformed art history would cease to sideline female artists in their creative offering merely because their chosen creative practice is rooted in crafts. By adopting Buber's approach in an art history that focuses on work embodying the ideal relations, we can construct a narrative that embraces this philosophical anthropology of art. Buber's perspective on artistic creativity opens up the possibility for a broader and more inclusive understanding of artistic creation throughout history. This represents what I term a feminist art history, where the will to create gives shape to the rhythm of the in-between. Thank you.